Welcome everyone. We're grateful that we get the opportunity to do the homeless training. Our topic this month is boosting staff and volunteer morale. And so I'm glad to have Felicia Metoyer from St. Margaret's House, who is joining us today. Felicia, will you want to introduce yourself and your role at St. Margaret's House?
Sure. I'm the director of volunteers at St. Margaret's House. And I started about a little more than 3 years ago.
Wonderful. Very good. So you do a lot of work with volunteers, and we're going to talk about four different key principles from Ryan Dowd's training on boosting morale for both staff and volunteers. We're going to talk about boosting lasting morale. We're going to talk about making space for emotions. We're going to talk about how communication builds trust, and we're going to talk about the reality that you are human and how that relates to the work that we do and the grace that we need to give ourselves and those that we work with also. So let's start by talking about building lasting morale. Felicia, what are some fun ways that you found to recognize volunteers?
Well, so we do a lot of the traditional things. We have annual volunteer luncheon. We do that. We just did it in April during National Volunteer Week. And that's a time where all of our volunteers get together and it could be a large crowd. This year we had about 68, 70 people. Um, we also try to do regular things throughout the year. I think that peak event is great, but in order to get some everlasting commitment, it's good to be acknowledged throughout the year. So sometimes it's just an in-person verbal thank you for being here. We appreciate your help. And other times it's in our newsletter. We have a newsletter that goes out every um, other week about approximately, and it's a volunteer newsletter. And I do that in collaboration with our marketing department. And that's a place where we also acknowledge volunteers. I have some creative irons in the fire that I want to roll out in the next couple of months, but typically it's very um, basic in terms of if we have images, we like to highlight images and talk about the work that people have done, particularly over the last couple of weeks, with some captions under the images. And then we welcome our new volunteers in that newsletter. We say goodbye to any volunteers that might be leaving. Um, and then we also one of the things I want to roll out is some video captions in our newsletter where we thank our volunteers and specifically name them by name. I think that's one thing I've learned is when you can name specifically a volunteer and or the thing that they did that was so helpful or why it was helpful, you really it's like it packs a bigger punch. And so, for example, I want to highlight Judy at the front desk. We had a really, really busy day on Friday, and she just greeted everyone with a smile, even when the line was really long. And that helped every single volunteer that day that helped every guest that day that she encountered feel like they were seen and heard and that their needs were met even after having to wait, right? And so that's just an example of a specific way that I could name the volunteer and be very specific about what she did in our environment, and then also be very specific about the impact that had. One other thing I'd like to highlight that's kind of fun that we did this year. So going back to the volunteer luncheon, we did a bingo game this year that was a huge hit, and it was kind of different than your typical bingo because we called it St. Margaret's House Volunteer Bingo, and we put their pictures on the squares, and then we called out their name and said a little bit about them, like maybe where they volunteered or how long they've been volunteering there, or what makes them special in that particular area as a volunteer, or how many total hours they've spent doing that over the years. And oh my gosh, our volunteers loved that. Not only did they love the bingo game, seeing their faces, seeing their friends' faces on the bingo boards. Of course, they loved winning and they loved the fun little prizes they got. But after the game, volunteers were asking for extra bingo cards to have as keepsakes. Like, that's really what I noticed that volunteers appreciate often are the little things. They're not there because they need um big acts of appreciation, but it's those little things that really mean a lot. Lastly, I do want to mention that there is a sort of generational uniqueness around how volunteers like to be recognized. And it took me a while to learn this, but there's a particular generation that appreciates things like service pins, like I've been volunteering for 10 years, or a 5-year service pin, or a 1-year service pin. And then certificates become important to some folks. Then there's volunteers, again, this is very generational, who want to be shouted out on Instagram or shouted out on social media or Facebook posts. And then there's volunteers who are like, you know what? No, none of that. And sometimes I don't know that that one is so much generational as it is just a personal preference. And they just would like me to, I just say would like me to, but I notice a preference for when I casually um, walk up to them and sit down next to them and say, oh, it is so great to have you here today. And like, that's really it. So I know I said a lot, but those are a lot of the ideas that I try to incorporate regularly. Oh, and then we do birthday cards. Volunteers love birthday cards, and we do that when we can.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost need to have like a TikTok dance challenge for like a 5-year dance that some generational people get to do at
Yeah.
5 years or 10 years and get recorded for that. Those are some great examples, Felicia. I'll add one that I found is thank you notes.
Yeah.
Personalized thank you notes are also really helpful because we so often don't do that in writing for people. But generationally, I find I can't write in cursive though for the younger generation because they don't know how to read cursive. So I have to do print and lettering for that. Those are some great examples. And everything we're talking about today, you can shift your context. If you work more with staff instead of volunteers, a lot of what we talk about is going to carry over regardless of what the employment status is of people you're working with. Those are some great examples, Felicia. Are there any bad examples that you've come across that have happened that didn't work out well? One that Ryan shared in the national training was serving beer at a team meeting that he realized quickly that wasn't a good idea when he was new on the job. Do you have any funny stories of bad examples that you've realized didn't work out well?
Yeah, I think now I can maybe call it funny. In the moment, it was like, oh, this is interesting. But last year's volunteer appreciation luncheon, we did a trivia game, and we called it St. Margaret's House Trivia. So we incorporated trivia about St. Margaret's House, and we've been in the community for 35 years, so it can go way back. And then we did some trivia that was related to the current staff, some of whom were very new. But I tried to make it fun, knowing that the answers wouldn't be obvious to everybody, but maybe we would give enough clues and that you maybe knew the staff enough to say, oh, I know this person's personality. She might be more likely to have, um, won this contest or whatever. And so we did it, and we mixed the groups so that you were on a team that in theory was supposed to have a mixture of volunteers, but we didn't create the groups ahead of time. And so the groups were slanted where maybe there would be a group of all volunteers who'd been there for a long time, and then another group of all volunteers who were fairly new and knew fewer answers to those questions. So there was frustration on both sides. There was frustration for some of the questions, and the feedback that I got was just that the questions were too hard, or it at some point became frustrating. And so, it's just looking back on it, I thought to myself, well, maybe I wanted it to be fun and a way to people to meet each other. So maybe create the groups ahead of time and make more mixed groups so they had more of a chance of people on their team knowing a variety of answers. If I did it again, I haven't done it again. So I can't report back on whether that improvement made a difference. The other improvement maybe could have been changing the actual questions and making them a little maybe simpler or easier to figure out. But yeah, that it wasn't a total flop, but it was kind of a bummer because I thought it was going to be great and it just wasn't.
Yeah, that's a learning experience. Another principle about boosting lasting morale is about connecting volunteers and staff to the mission. So, what's the mission of St. Margaret's House, and how do you practice that mission with volunteers to boost their morale?
Yeah, so our mission is basically we try to keep it short, sweet, and simple. Through the healing power of a loving community, we affirm the dignity of women and children by providing a safe space and meeting essential needs. And so the biggest place where our volunteers get introduced to that mission is through orientation. And sometimes what's helpful with volunteers in terms of understanding how to enact that mission is to pull one or two words from that mission statement. And so I pull out the words affirm the dignity, and I really talk about how we can, in our actions as a staff and as volunteers and any donors and guests too, but in our context, staff and volunteers, every action that we take should in some way affirm the dignity of every woman in our community, not just our guests, but ourselves as staff, volunteers as well. And then I like to give examples, and then we go around in a kind of a circle and give an example of how do you experience dignity in your everyday life? Like, what is an example of something that makes you feel dignified? We could also go the opposite route and talk about, give an example of when you feel less dignified. But I don't tend to do that. I don't tend to need to do that. And I wanted to stay positive during the orientation session, but we do talk about that. And then I give some examples from each area of our house and talk about how, if, for example, if you're in the kitchen, one of the ways we affirm the dignity of every woman as a kitchen, if you're a volunteer, is as a woman is getting her food down the line, because we serve on a line, we ask her, would you like some potatoes? Rather than slapping them on there, assuming you like or want those. And I think it's a very small thing, but it's a good example of how, as a volunteer, you help us enact our mission. And I don't want to go into, I could go into each area and give an example. I'm happy to do that if you want, but
That's good. That's a good
I'm
example.
hoping that gets us pretty far.
Yeah, no, that's great. And for those listening to this, reflect on for your agency, what's your mission? Can you clearly articulate it like Felicia has, and think about how does that relate to the work that you're doing with your staff and volunteers, and having those discussions about what that looks like, or maybe what that doesn't look like from their own experiences. That's really helpful, Felicia. The second aspect that we're going to talk about today for boosting morale is making space for emotions. So, Felicia, as you reflect on your volunteers, how do they process the same experience differently? What's an example where you've seen that happen?
Yeah, so just for context, our volunteers are there for a shift once a week typically. And so often our volunteers won't always have a context for what they're experiencing with a guest that we've had, because we've seen them several times in a given week or over time, and they're seeing them often one moment in time. And it's hard to build up for them to build up a context for what might be happening in this particular guest's life or not. And so what we see typically, and I'm thinking particularly the front desk, sometimes in the kitchen, is usually a misunderstanding or sort of lack of understanding of a guest's um, atypical, if you would, presentation in the moment. And so one of the ways I try to support an understanding of why a guest might present atypically in a moment, or why someone might be elevated about something that maybe doesn't seem like it would elevate you if you're, at just, your average volunteer. So someone approaches you and they can't get into the clothes closet in the moment, and you're trying to make an appointment, you're at the front desk as a volunteer trying to get them into the clothes closet and to get some, this is where women select clothes. And that's very agitating for the woman in front of her. And maybe her response is heightened more than you would expect, given that it's just a clothes closet appointment. And so we might have some context about, oh, that woman has been spending multiple nights outside, that woman just got robbed, or we might have more information. Usually it's that lack of information that creates for the volunteer either this experience of like fear of the elevated response, or they take it a little personally because of the elevated response, and because they don't understand all of what's happening in that woman's life that might elevate her response. So preemptively, I do a continued education session with all of my volunteers. It's available to everyone. Not everyone can come. Earlier I said we have upwards of 90 plus volunteers. So it's a rotation. I get people when they come. And in that, and I do it once a month on a Friday morning. In those sessions, we do use the Ryan Dowd material to better understand the impact of trauma on the brain, and how, without knowing what someone has previously experienced, we can comfortably assume that there's going to be some brain shift if they've engaged in something recently that might cause an elevated reaction. So that helps preemptively, in theory, a volunteer to understand how that could work, and hopefully eliminate the chances of taking it personally, and also hopefully mitigate or minimize the chances of fear. In the moment, I also train volunteers to a couple of strategies. One is to pass the baton. If they really can't manage the emotion around what they're seeing or experiencing, or the interaction they're having, to pass the baton to they usually are working in pairs of two, to their fellow volunteer who might be able to take over for them. And we talk about all the different ways you can do that, how you can do it subtly. Or we always have staff on every floor. No volunteers ever by themselves, and they can pass the baton to a staff, or invite a staff to step in. But those are two. I have the kind of preemptive and the in the moment examples of how we try to help volunteers work through emotions. Then we have a post strategy. We do have a licensed clinical social worker on staff. We actually have two. And I can give this as an example, but I don't want to go too long. But if someone does have an experience that even afterwards, they're still trying to work through, a volunteer, for example, what just happened? What did I do wrong? Why do I still feel unsettled about that exchange? And will this change the way I'm able to show up as a volunteer on my next shift at St. Margaret's House? Like, if those are some of the feelings that our volunteers are having, we do utilize the skill set of our staff members that have licensed clinical social work experience, and we invite our volunteers to go to seek their support as well. Sometimes it's by appointment. Sometimes a person just happens to be there and I can send them up right away to their office, whatever works out best. But that's another way we try to use the resources we have. And also, I'll often find that out after I've debriefed with the volunteer. So when I hear that something has happened, even if I wasn't there, staff will usually let me know, and then I reach out to that volunteer either in person or through an email if their shift is already over. Hey, how you doing? I heard you had this rough interaction. you want to talk about it. And then if I also determine a little more work can be done, I'll reach out to our licensed clinical social worker and make the connection.
That's really helpful to think about what we can do beforehand, in the moment, and afterwards also. Those are three distinct stages. It's helpful to hear those different strategies that you have for each of those. The work that we do with the unhoused often deals with tragedies and hardships in life. So how do you address the death of a guest or a volunteer and make space for emotions there when people are grieving and experiencing a loss?
Yeah, so at St. Margaret's House, we actually have several different ways that we make that possible. One, so we have staff meetings once a week, and at our staff meetings, we do have a moment of prayer. And so we are a non-denominational institution, but our founding is we have a connection to the Episcopal Church, and we do allow space for spirituality and prayer. And so we incorporate that in our staff meetings. And so we'll often put people who are experiencing hardship or death on that prayer list, and we will pray for them. And then we will send a little note out to the family and or friends of the people that we are praying for on that day. That's one way. Another way is, again, our community can use the resource of our licensed clinical social workers who also have skills to help people work through grief. We also have scheduled grief sessions or grief groups that one of our staff members she has her master's, I believe in theology or divinity from Notre Dame, and she will host a grief circle pretty regularly at St. Margaret's House, and it's open to anyone who wants to participate, any woman in the house. So in theory, although I don't think a volunteer has participated, they would be more than welcome. And so that's another space that guests, volunteers, and staff can engage with supporting each other in those moments of grief and loss. And I think those are sort of our best and most scheduled, if you would, ways of helping our whole community, really, but particularly for this conversation, our volunteers manage loss and grief. And then too, I always have an open door. If you need to come and talk about anything, I make sure that my volunteers are aware of that. And then that way I can point them to any of those opportunities as need be.
Those are great examples about creating that space for emotions and letting people process them and work through them. That's really helpful. Our third area for boosting morale is communication that builds trust, and how important communication is to our volunteers and to our staff. How do other staff at St. Margaret's House support all this amazing work that you're doing with so many volunteers?
Yeah, so this took me a minute to coordinate, but it has been working really well, and I am so happy to share it because I wish someone was there to share it with me. But I have taken each area of volunteering and really try to consider each area a team. So we have the kitchen team, the front desk team, the donations team, and each team has a staff member team leader. And so that staff member team leader becomes sort of one of the communication portals for that group of volunteers. And so, for example, the team leader might send emails to either a member of their team or to their whole team as a reminder of something. So the part of the ways the communication happens, it happens differently for each group, actually. So for the front desk team, our staff member Ariana has a spiral binder that's where she writes handwritten notes each day for all of the volunteers coming in that day. There's a lot of shifts at the front desk, and a lot of things change from day to day and from shift to shift. And so we have found that that's one of the sort of easier ways and most consistent, and people know to look at that spiral binder as soon as they get in. And then volunteers can leave messages there for Ariana or for any other staff member or each other. And so it becomes a communication spot for everybody, but particularly that staff member uses it. The kitchen team she has a 3-ring binder that's in the kitchen that will have like the menu for the day, who's absent for the day. The ice machine is broken today. So that becomes a communication tool for her as well. And then the volunteers can communicate back to that team leader in that 3-ring binder also. And the donations team leader, she will do a lot of emailing. Her team is a little more spread out in the house. And so I noticed that she tends to have success emailing her group. All of the team leaders do their own amount of emailing. One of the things that some of the team leaders also do is they'll do, similar to my volunteer newsletter, they'll do their own newsletter. Like particularly the kitchen team manager used to like to do like a quick email to everybody. This is how many meals we served this month. Here's, how many children came through the house and were fed, or whatever the case may be. And it kind of gives people sort of data to get excited about when they think about their impact. And it's a fun way to communicate what's going on in that's positive about her area.
Right. Those are great variety of examples of different ways that we can communicate. So it's helpful to think about the different mediums that we can use. You talked about dignity within the mission of St. Margaret's House, and understanding the core values are important thing to keep communicating in the work that we do with staff and volunteers. What are the other core values of St. Margaret's House that you're trying to communicate regularly to your volunteers?
Yeah, so we kind of have 4 centralized core values, and I'll share them with you one by one. So the first one is showing respect for each person's inherent dignity. And again, it really pulls off that central theme. Next is acting with integrity by engaging in all interactions with openness and honesty with the desire to do good. The third one is practicing inclusivity and open-mindedness by honoring individuals' culture, historical, and gender-related realities. And the last one, offering compassion by responding to the needs of others with concern and acceptance. And I will say that that second one, acting with integrity by engaging in all interactions with openness and honesty and the desire to do good, what I like about that one is the desire to do good creates space for the fact that we might sometimes make mistakes. And if at our core is a constant desire to do good, a mistake can usually be fixed and is okay. And so I love that we phrase that way.
Yeah, those are really helpful. And again, for those listening, think about what are your organization's core values, and what are you doing to both name them and communicate them to your staff and volunteers, because that's what helps builds trust through that communication. Our fourth area that we're going to talk about and final area is the reality that we are human. So my first question is, what makes Felicia unique as a leader?
Well, so this is my own take. I'm hoping that other people would say the same thing, but I like to believe, and in my intention is to be personalized. And when I talk to people and engage with my volunteers, I like to be very specific about who I'm talking to, why they matter, what they've done that's helpful to our organization. I think that why is huge. I like to start orientation by telling our volunteers my why. And then I like to do a little exercise when they get to explore their initial why. Like, what brought you to St. Margaret's House? What about what you believed that we do when you went to our website drew you in? And then what's really neat is over time to engage in activities with volunteers where they get to talk about their refined why, what keeps them coming back. And so I really try to utilize a lot of those specifics. I also like to create the community and do things with volunteers that build community with each other. So a lot of what I do, and sometimes it's excessive, but oh, have you met volunteer X in the kitchen area? Oh, you guys need to meet each other. You're both from Notre Dame. Oh, you haven't met so and so. Her wife works with your husband. Like, right. Like, I like to try to make sure that I can connect people to each other. So I think that, like, I don't know if you've ever done personality types, but one of my descriptors is that I'm a connector. And I like to believe that that is pretty unique to me, in that I see when people are like, like 5 degrees of separation or 2 degrees, and I try to get them to know it and to bring people together in that way. So that's another thing that I think maybe is a unique quality. And then just thoughtfulness, understanding, integrity. When I say I'm going to do something, I do my best to do it, and I try to do it at the highest level. And then, too, I don't know that this makes me unique, but I do like to point out one of my best, I don't know if I want to say best, but something that works really well for me is when I realize that I've had a moment where I learned something, or maybe I made a mistake and learned something, to name it in front of the people that it matters to, and sort of talk out loud about my growth moment. Oh, I noticed that I responded in this way. Here's how I could have done better. Maybe next, because I know this, this is why I know that. And then so next time, that this is encouraging me to do or respond in this other way next time. And to, like, have that conversation out loud in front of both my colleagues and other volunteers, it makes me human, but it also creates um, a platform for other people to do the same thing, and for us to help each other in that way. So now we can feed off of that, and we can help each other get better if we create that environment.
Right. So important. And you're modeling that for people. And so it's another reflection question for all of us is consider what are your unique characteristics and approaches that you bring to your work and that you relate to with your staff and your volunteers. The work that we do with Unhoused is full of challenges, and there's always more needs and more requests that we have, and it can feel overwhelming. How do you take care of yourself, Felicia? Our final question is, what does your self-care look like?
Well, I'm a reader, so there's nothing like settling in with a good book. I also am very physical, so I wouldn't say I'm athletic, but I like to move. And so I start my day with exercise, and that helps me kind of get my mind right. And then at the end of a day, if it's a particularly hard day, um, I generally like to, if I'm not cozying up with a book, I'll walk with an audiobook. So then I get a little bit of both walking and movement. But for me, particularly, moments of stress, the type of self-care that I need is um, uh, alone. Right. So I fill my bucket by being solitary. And that, everybody's different. And I hear a lot of people will fill their bucket by being in a crowd, and they get their energy that way. I get my energy with more solitary activities. That being said, if I've had a particularly stressful moment, interaction, or day, I usually do need to debrief first with someone I trust. And for me, it's typically a colleague at St. Margaret's House first, because they contextually understand. And often it's our Susan, she's also my office mate, so it's a little bit easy in that way. And a friend, she's become a close friend, but she's also a licensed clinical social worker. And she's really, the folks with that skill in particular whether they're your friend or not, are really good at bringing you down when they can see that you're elevated. They kind of know how to get you to look at a situation from a variety of viewpoints, or a very specific one if need be. And so just knowing who to go to that you trust, if you need to debrief or break down something that just happened, that's really troubling you. And then my second person that I go to that's not related to St. Margaret's House is my life partner. And that's actually kind of nice because he responds um, without the context. And so it's actually interesting sometimes to get that point of view, like, oh, this is what happened at work today. And he's like, well, did you think about X, Y, or Z? And or this something like that happened to me at my work, and here's how I responded, right? So it's an interesting viewpoint, and it's another person I trust. But sometimes it takes me a minute to be able to talk about my day outside of St. Margaret's House after I've had that time to decompress. But those are all for me very, very important self-care opportunities.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for sharing and for everything you've communicated here today. It's been really helpful for us to think about how we can be boosting the morale of both our staff and volunteers. Thanks, Felicia.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.